If there was time to practice, there was time to consult. And consulting with Congress is not just some high-minded principle, not some abstract thing, not a nice to have. It's a got to have.
The U.S. military rehearsed a secret operation in Venezuela for months. They practiced it over and over, and the entire time, Congress was being told it wasn't even on the table. So the question isn't whether it was executed well. The question is, who actually authorized it?
My basic question is, what are we doing here? What is the point? What is the goal of this hearing?
How do I know?
As you know well, having served on this dais alongside me for 14 years, this is an oversight hearing. And the point, the purpose of oversight is to encourage, if necessary, to compel consultation between the administration and Congress. And I just wanted to raise with you at the outset, of course the Commander-in-Chief has, under Article 2, the power to defend the American people against an imminent threat or an incoming attack. How else could we be kept safe? But our Article 1 power requires consultation. I'll agree with all of my colleagues. Nicolas Maduro is a bad guy. He was indicted. There was a bounty on his head over several administrations. His removal, flawlessly executed by American troops, thankfully none of them hurt, did cost the lives of 75 to 100 Venezuelans and Cubans, was a dangerous and high-risk maneuver. I am glad that it ended as well as it possibly could. But the point here that I want to make first is that it was rehearsed for months. The administration had a number of contingencies it was trying to navigate through. But over the course of months, when the administration was taking strike after strike after strike against drug trafficking boats, in several instances where senior leaders of the administration briefed this committee and others, we were told that military action to remove Maduro was not on the table, that the campaign to try and deter drug trafficking was not going to include the exact military action that followed. Yet it was being rehearsed. If there was time to practice, there was time to consult. And consulting with Congress is not just some high-minded principle, not some abstract thing, not a nice to have. It's a got to have. And look, the chairman opened by saying that this was limited in scope and duration, that it was executed flawlessly, and we should all be happy about the result. That much I agree with. But our president continues to threaten Delcy Rodriguez and the remnant of the Maduro regime with military force if they don't comply. We should know, what are the policies, what is the path, what is the plan forward? You and I both know the long and painful history of wars that began and seemed to be resolved and then opened up into excruciating, expensive, years-long conflicts. In Iraq in particular, in Libya and elsewhere, things do not always go as planned. And so consultation with Congress that is truthful and forthcoming and transparent is critical. In your service in this body, you knew that. And our president says we never asked for anything from NATO, and they never gave us anything. And you suggest that they aren't carrying their weight, whether it's in bases or in access or in troops or in service. It is allies that will keep us safe in the Indo-Pacific. Our treaty allies, Korea and Japan and Australia and the Philippines, are going to be critical to Indo-Pacific security against our principal threat, China, and in Europe. I'm worried that the very foundations of trust are being shaken. Our democracy depends on consultation with Congress that is truthful and timely, and the confidence of our allies depends on them knowing where we're going next. Today, an armada is steaming towards Iran. Our president is on social media threatening Iran, and I hope I can count on you, Mr. Secretary, to consult with us and inform us before our next actions, whether against Nigeria, Colombia, Cuba, Iran, or anywhere else. And I hope and believe that I can count on you to reinforce the sanctity of NATO, not to reimagine it, but to reinforce it.
Thank you. Well, let me unpack the 3 points you touched upon: consultation, NATO, Greenland, alliances in Greenland. Let me tell you on the consultation. Look, this has been a point of tension, not just in this administration and Congress, but in multiple administrations. As you rightly pointed out, I was a big fan of consultation when I was sitting over there. Now, you know, it's a different job, different time. But it's not, that's not necessarily the point. This is a very unique situation that we faced here. the fact of the matter is that our mission, and the one you were briefed on and talked about, that mission remains ongoing, and that is the counter-narcotic mission that we continue to carry out in the, as controversial as it may be. You may not all be fans of it, obviously, but it is happening in the Eastern Pacific, and it is also happening in the Caribbean Basin. The problem is, or the good news is, there aren't a lot of drug boats moving in the Caribbean Basin anymore, and that's what we had briefed Congress upon. This specific mission that you've talked about, one of the reasons why you rehearse it is to see if it's even feasible, to basically go to the president and say, is this something that's even an option on the table? The truth of the matter is that this mission could not have been briefed to Congress because it wasn't even in the realm of possible until very late in December, when all of our efforts to negotiate with Maduro had failed, and the president was finally presented these options and made these decisions. It was also a trigger-based operation. It may never have happened. It required a number of factors to all align at the right place at the right time in a very limited window, and it wasn't even clear if it was ever going to be possible. There's also the aspect which I do not control, and that is deference to the Department of War on operational security. Despite the fact that we had kept this quite constrained, the truth of the matter is that this was leaked. We now know it was leaked by a contractor at the Department of War that, had it been published, would have endangered the lives of people and/or would have probably canceled the ability to carry out the mission. So this is a real tension, and one that I'm doing the best I can to try to manage within the constraints of two things: operational security and also decisions being made. There are multiple contingencies for events all over the world, including some that none of us think were ever going to come to fruition. And in this particular case, one of the reasons why you rehearse these things in advance is to know whether it's even possible. Is this even doable? And what are the risks associated with doing? So you can present options to the president, who ultimately makes these decisions. In the case of reimagining NATO, it most certainly has to be reimagined. And the reason why it has to be reimagined is not because its purpose is reimagined. Its capabilities have to be reimagined. Let me give you as a point of example. There's a lot of talk about security guarantees. And it's something that there's general agreement about now with the case of Ukraine. But those security guarantees basically involve the deployment of a handful of European troops, primarily French in the UK, and then a U.S. backstop. But in fact, the security guarantee is the U.S. backstop. It is not and I'm not diminishing the fact that some countries in Europe are willing to place troops in a post-war Ukraine. What I'm pointing out is that is irrelevant without the U.S. backstop. And the reason why you need such a strong U.S. backstop is because our allies and our partners have not invested enough in their own defense capabilities over the last 20 or 30 years. Now, hopefully that's going to change. Hopefully that is changing. And in some cases and in some particular countries, it's already changed. But this is a fact that we cannot ignore. NATO is going to be stronger if our allies are more capable, especially, and here's the reality, whether we want to accept it or not, we have interests all over the world. We have interests in the Middle East, we have interests in the Western Hemisphere, and we most certainly have interests in the Indo-Pacific. A number of you have already pointed out that China is the chief challenge. We can't have the same soldiers or the same ships in both Europe and in the Indo-Pacific. We have to pick. No matter how many ships we build, no matter how many capabilities we grow, we're going to have to make these adjustments. And the stronger our partners are in NATO, the more flexibility the United States will have to secure our interests in different parts of the world. That's not an abandonment of NATO. That is a reality of the 21st century and the world that's changing now. In the case of Greenland, I'll say we're in a good place right now. We had excellent meetings with the Secretary General of NATO. In fact, even as I speak to you now, there'll be some technical level meetings between us and our partners in Greenland and Denmark on this issue. And I think we have in place a process that's going to bring us to a good outcome for everybody. The president's interest on Greenland has been clear. It's a national security interest. It's a long-standing interest that predates this administration. It's one that our allies acknowledge is real. I think we're going to get something positive done. We're going to begin that process in a very professional, straightforward way. It begins today, and it'll be a regular process. We're going to try to do it in a way that isn't like a media circus every time these conversations happen, because we think that creates more flexibility on both sides to arrive at a positive outcome. And I think we're going to get there. And I thought it was noteworthy and important that despite your concerns, the president at his speech in Davos made very clear that the United States was not going to use force or military force in Greenland. So I think we're going to wind up in a good place. We got a little bit of work to do, but I think we're going to wind up in a good place. And I think you'll hear the same from our colleagues in Europe very shortly.
Mr. Secretary, the Gang of Eight has never leaked.
Senator,
It is critical that you consult with Congress. For us to be safe, our allies have to trust us. And for this committee to do our work, we have to trust you.
What you just watched is a quiet constitutional crisis dressed up in diplomatic language. A senior U.S. senator, someone who sat on the Armed Services Committee for 14 years, is essentially asking the Secretary of Defense a single question: why did you lie to us? Not in those words, but that's what this is. Because here's what we know happened. The U.S. military conducted a covert operation to remove Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. American troops were deployed. 75 to 100 Venezuelans and Cubans were killed. The mission was dangerous, high risk, and by most accounts, pulled off without losing a single American life. That part, most people would agree, is a good outcome. But here's the problem. For months leading up to that operation, senior administration officials sat in front of this very committee and told them that military action to remove Maduro was not on the table. And the whole time, they were rehearsing it. They were running drills, planning contingencies, stress testing scenarios, preparing for exactly the operation they told Congress wasn't happening. The Secretary's defense? They were rehearsing it to see if it was even possible, that it wasn't truly a real option until late December when negotiations collapsed. That's a reasonable explanation on the surface, but the senator's point cuts right through it. The Gang of Eight has never leaked. That's the bipartisan group of the most senior congressional leaders, specifically cleared for the most sensitive national security information in the country. Their record on keeping secrets is essentially perfect. And they weren't told. Then there's NATO. The senator had just returned from Denmark, where he laid a wreath at a memorial for 52 Danish soldiers who died fighting alongside Americans after 9/11. The only time in history Article 5, NATO's Mutual Defense Clause, has ever been invoked was to defend us. And our current president's position is that NATO never gave us anything. The secretary tried to reframe it, arguing NATO needs to be reimagined, not abandoned, that European allies haven't invested enough in their own defense, and America can't stretch its military across Europe and the Indo-Pacific simultaneously. That's actually not a crazy argument. But there's a difference between pressuring allies to spend more and publicly humiliating them, between strategic repositioning and shaking the very foundation of trust that those alliances are built on. Because here's the uncomfortable reality the secretary didn't directly address. In a potential conflict with China over Taiwan, America needs Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines. We need those alliances intact and willing. And right now, every ally watching Washington is asking themselves the same quiet question. If America treats Denmark this way, what happens to us? The senator ended with a warning more than a question. An armada is currently headed toward Iran. The president is issuing threats on social media. And Congress, the body the Constitution explicitly gave the power to declare war, is being kept in the dark. The framers didn't make that choice by accident. They'd seen what unchecked executive war-making looks like. They'd lived it under a king. The oversight hearing you just watched wasn't theater. It was a senator trying to pull back the curtain on a pattern where the administration acts first, explains later, and consults never. Whether that makes you feel safer or more concerned, that's worth thinking hard about. Drop a comment. Do you think Congress deserves to be consulted on military operations, or does secrecy keep our troops safer?